Hey there, how are you? Take a seat. Today I'd like to talk about a little anime called Toradora, which loosely translates to Tiger and Dragon. Based on a light novel series, it debuted in October of 2008 and was created by Studio JC staff and directed by Tatsuyuki Nagai, who to my delight was also responsible for the Railgun series. One thing I would like to point out in regard to my review is that I evaluate anime, especially episodic series, on a different scale than I do Western live-action movies and shows. There are many pervading tropes, cliches, and other tendencies specific to these Japanese cartoons, even when they're adapted well for Western audiences through a good dub, and to some extent sub. Many people, especially fans of anime, like some if not all of these tropes: moe, blob spats, embarrassed tsundere, exposition, over-exposition, and in more recent years, softcore porn. It's understandable that these tropes exist, some find them cute or desirable in some way. I generally find all the affirmation cliches pandering and annoying, but that doesn't stop me from watching anime because a good story and likable characters keep me invested. And the more anime I watch, the more tolerance I build up to pandering tropes and eye-rolling cliches. It's hard for me to imagine whether I would like Toradora, or even finish the first episode 5 years ago, before I became introduced to anime. It took me a while to develop a taste that allowed me to appreciate good anime, and I'm still not entirely sure why I do. This is something I can't presently fully articulate. Regardless, the point is I evaluate Toradora in comparison to other anime, specifically any anime that loosely falls into the slice of life genre. This is important when touching on the show's problems. Are there problems with the show? Things that I would prefer would have been done differently? Sure. Over-exposition during emotional scenes, the klutz cliche, and Taiga's early intermittent attitude of dog and master with Ryuji rubbed me the wrong way. But first, all these issues are subjective, and they stand more in the way of my ability to share the anime rather than my enjoyment factor of it. More importantly, these issues I take with the series are not unique to Toradora, but are pervading aspects of anime that I've gotten somewhat used to. What is unique to Toradora is its minimalization of these tropes and cliches in favor of more substantial content. Now on to the good stuff. I like the animation style. The animation itself is a bit minimal sometimes, but one thing the show does especially well is lighting, which gives a very warm feel to the show, and it really comes into play during some of the more emotional scenes. The dub is good. Anime has an unfortunate, but I think largely abating tradition of having poor English dubs, and Toradora seems to abandon this ritual because the dub is very good, almost right up there with Black Lagoon and Cowboy Bebop. Other aspects of note is that the story is extremely focused. Despite the 25-episode length, I don't feel as if the story ever wasted time faffing around on anything that didn't ultimately contribute to Taiga and Ryuji's relationship. The show is also relatively free of fan service, and this in and of itself deserves a commendation. During a time in which anime is so inundated with the stuff, it's a bit refreshing. However, in order to get into the substance of Toradora, I'd like to talk about the characters. Generally, when discussing stories, whether they be shows, video games, or other kinds of media, I find myself almost always focusing on the characters. Now, this is not to say themes and stories cannot be explored without characters, but more often than not, I find that my ability to like or dislike a story depends completely on my ability to like or empathize with the characters. I think this is especially true with the slice of life genre, and I would take it a step further and say that my ability to like such stories hinges significantly on whether the characters are likable and believably human. And I think this hits close to what I wanted to articulate about Toradora. There wasn't a single character in the main cast that I disliked. All of them were extremely well-rounded, had experienced some level of character growth, or were explored in a way that significantly changed my perspective of them. More importantly, they were all human characters. Granted, in an anime, like one would expect from a cartoon, these aspects of humanity are exaggerated somewhat per tradition of the medium, but they do exist. And that's what makes Toradora special in my opinion. It has humanity, and a lot of anime doesn't. In a medium filled with loud and complex characters that even by the show's end are strictly defined more often than not by their hair color, Toradora stands out. Perhaps one of the most interesting characters is Minori, who comes across initially as your typical hyperactive, happy, hardworking character, who, as the show progresses, is occasionally forced to lose her superficial complexion in order to confront one personal issue or another. It's not clear how sustainable her outward personality is, although the show seems to reassure the viewer that it's a genuine part of her character that she relies on to push herself through life. This comes in deep contrast to Ami, who deliberately hides behind a facade because of fear of what other people will think of her. While Minori seems internally driven to put on a cheerful face, Ami feels outwardly pressured to do so. However, despite their differences, I think Minori and Ami are the two wisest characters in the story. They're the first to see how the relationship dynamics are playing out, and although they aren't above being petty, their primary conflict to me was the most interesting, with Ami advocating for a more open attitude about her feelings from Minori who almost scarily refuses to give it. Both their attitudes make perfect sense for their character, with Ami's standpoint coming from her own revelation gained from Taiga, and Minori being herself, a character appearing damaged in a way that's never fully explored in the show. Yasuku is also interesting, as his character is the one that actually undergoes the most change throughout the show, He possesses his own style of wisdom and initially comes across as a far more omnipotent character that quite suddenly is revealed to be just as vulnerable and silly as the rest of his peers, if not more. Perhaps his most outstanding characteristic is his goddamn self-confidence, the primary source of his humor and a perfect combination or compromise between not giving a fuck and giving one.
It's the ultimate form of prostration. Prostration! Kneeling isn't enough to express my gratitude for the way Aisaka stood up for me. So, full prostration! Aisaka?
Yes?
He and Minarine contributed the most in terms of comedy to the show, and the manner in which the two formed a duo of talented, bombastic, possibly gay promoters of cheer was cute. Personally, I ship the couple. Ryuji is a likable protagonist with his own quirks and qualities and isn't a self-insert despite the mild harem vibe I felt the show gave off. Despite his appearance, he is a genuinely kind person and someone I wanted to find happiness no matter who he ended up with. One thing in particular I liked with his relationship with Taiga is there was a limit to the amount of shit he allowed himself to take from her. In many other anime, when a tsundere meets a guy character, it's a little annoying how much he allows himself to be physically abused despite supposedly being able to hold his own in other situations. Maybe some people find this trope funny, I personally don't, and I think I side more with Taiga in her promotion of gender equality.
I can't hit a girl.
What are you, a sexist?
His relationship with Taiga is also far more watchable to me because Taiga never comes across as a complete bitch. She may be violent, lazy, spoiled, entitled, and selfish, all traits that make sense for her to have considering her background, but as the show progresses she becomes significantly more likable. Not so much because she changes, although she does a little bit of that, but because the show reveals her not only to be a kind person, but a very self-aware one.
I'm trying to let him know that in this whole world, there's at least one person who cares about him.
Okay, but...
I know. I do it as much for me as for them.
Now at this point, some of you may feel that I'm just adding meaning to the characters that doesn't actually exist, and that's okay. Some people may have watched Toradora and been like, this is average slice of life with no deeper themes, and that's fine. Toradora is art, and as such is very subjective, as its ability to make connections, or lack thereof, with an individual depends on the person. On some level, I connected with Toradora, and I enjoyed it, because I found a level of significance in the series. Whether it was because I noticed what the creators had intended, or took away something that I myself had put in there, isn't really important to me. The point is, the show allowed me to derive meaning from it, and for that, I liked it.